How is it possible that something like an empty shampoo bottle or last minute cancellation can devolve into a conversation about whether or not someone is loved or trusted? I was reading a Reddit thread recently about a husband who was talking with his wife, and after she went into the shower, found that the shampoo bottle was empty, she lost it. Right? And it was a thread that was largely talking about the concept of overreaction. And of course, a lot of men were chiming in, but also a lot of people who had had this experience in their family life and in their friendships were talking with kind of a heavy level of confusion about how something so small ended up becoming essentially a metaphor for the value of the relationship. It got me thinking how most of us, most of the time, see the mistakes that we make and the impact we have on other people on a really small scale. Like if we make a mistake or we do something wrong, we see it kind of as an isolated incident, as an oops. Ooh, I dropped the ball. Oh shit, I forgot. You know what I mean? I think that's actually one of the privileges of moving through other people's lives as ourselves. We are completely shielded from the impact of our behaviors, and we have behind the scenes backstage access to our own intentions, which most of the time are good or careless. So when I think of conversations about a shampoo bottle or last minute cancellation being the final straw in a relationship that maybe had lasted decades or even just a handful of years, two things come to my mind. The first thing is the idea of frequency, and the second thing is the idea of impact. Because we're moving through our lives thinking our thoughts and kind of generally viewing the world as our next action to our next action, we don't really keep track of how many times we make the same mistakes. And if we do, we even sometimes use it as a quality of our character. Oh, I'm always late, or oh, I'm so forgetful. And I'm in no way saying that everyone should be perfect and aspire to some perfect performance of friendship or wifehood or friendhood or whatever. But I do think sometimes we even use that transparency about ourselves, our flaws, as a get out of jail free card when the things that we do or don't do hurt people. Like I can tell you, hey, I have a tendency to slap people when I'm drunk. It doesn't make the slap sting any less when I do it to you. And there's definitely a value of communicating and also knowing things in advance, especially if those are things that people are working on. If they're aware that it's a problem in their life and they're trying to find solutions around it, that can also totally bring people together. But to circle back to the idea of frequency and impact, one of the things that we don't have access to is another person's experience. So to take the idea of the shampoo bottle, for example, if every single time a person goes to get into their shower, and we know how showers can be, right? It's the end of your day, it's the beginning of your day. They reach for that bottle and it's empty and their body's already soaking wet. That can throw off the entire course of their day. And in terms of impact, right, we're not there with them in that experience. We're sometimes there for the aftermath, but not all the time. We don't realize the impact that that empty bottle of shampoo or body wash had on their mood, the trajectory of their day, and even their week. And of course, I'm not justifying abusive retaliatory dynamics. I'm just talking about the lived experience of the impact of carelessness or negative behavior. So they get in the shower, they're soaking wet, there's no body wash for them. If it happens once, I'm sure they're like, hey, guess what happened to me today? Right? As most people would. This brings me to the second part, which is frequency. So then imagine that happens to them 2 to 3 times a month, which means 2 to 3 times a month, a fundamental component of their routine is disrupted by the carelessness of another person. They are forced to confront with a wet, naked body in the shower the fact that someone did not even think to let them know or even replace something essential to their daily life. This is how one thing, one isolated oops, goes from being, oh crap, an empty bottle, let's do better next time, to this is a fundamental representation of disrespect and lack of regard for me. This is how a tiny inconvenience, point of friction or frustration can turn into an all-out brawl filled with rage and resentment. The problem I see a lot of the time, though, is when people are confronted with the first oops, it doesn't have a sticky quality in their mind. Especially when it comes to relational transgressions that have to do with carelessness. How do you get someone to remember something that they already forgot to do? It's a tricky thing, right? I think this gets doubly difficult when you're a woman in a household doing the majority of the domestic or the emotional labor, or somebody who feels they do that in their friend group or in their life, to remember that you would never forget to replace the shampoo bottle, or you would never cancel 5 minutes before an appointment. I also don't believe that that kind of thinking is healthy, but I think it plays a major role in how this resentment sort of boils over. And I want to say really clearly, right? A lot of the ways that we learn how to be self-reflective and intentional is because the things that we're messing up are surfaced by our community. And this is a really beautiful thing that often leads to deeper relationships and a really important concept called grace. Grace allows us to be generous when people make mistakes. It allows us to be generous with ourselves and other people. But grace isn't sort of like a bank account with an endless kind of balance that you can charge all the time. Dr. Stan Tatkin is one of my favorite relationship researchers, thinkers, and something he says a lot that really resonates with me is I have to feel like my partner can get it right for me 90% of the time. And so what that means, right, is in order to allow that 10% of fracas, of chaos, I need to have a feeling of bondedness and connection to another person that they will be considering me, protecting me, valuing me throughout the course of their day in life in order for me to be able to offer that 10% off coupon, if you get what I'm saying. Because if you don't have that sensation that somebody can get it right for you, understand the impact of their actions on you, and protect you, first of all and foremost, from themselves, then you're not able to feel safe offering grace. It feels then like self-sacrifice and self-betrayal. It leads people to think things like, so you get in the shower, you take your shower, you willingly use the last of the body wash, and you forget that I exist. And that experience is dehumanizing. I think anyone could acknowledge that, especially if it happens repeatedly, and especially if it happens without a sense of remorse or repair. I think this is also a hard thing in dynamics where people are like, just tell me, and they don't understand the labor of necessarily telling someone something multiple times and then also having to co-develop solutions for something that they didn't do wrong. I see this a lot with men in marriages that will say, just put a note up in the shower to remind me. And this kind of thing I understand, right? It seems on the surface like direct communication and problem solving, but what it ultimately does is put another person in charge with a task to do to prevent you from doing something that is careless and thoughtless in the first place. Essentially putting someone else in charge of your responsibility to repair. And I understand when these conversations come up the first time, the third time, or the 15th time, they're not easy conversations to have. And the more you have them, often the more intense and angry they get. I think this is why, as a culture, as a community, we need to get a lot better at validation over verification. If someone comes to you foaming at the mouth because, once again, they've had to take a shower with no body wash and it happens to be your fault, you don't have to verify what happened or why. You don't have to verify if they have the right to be that upset. It's so easy to validate the reality of the situation. Oh my gosh, yes, I have done this to you many times. It is incredibly frustrating. I can imagine how infuriating it was the first time. Now it's the 10th time. That's a terrible experience. And the way that we resolve these interpersonal issues, the way that we also develop grace and trust between each other is going, this time, I'm so sorry it took 10. It should never have taken 10. I'm going to make sure that I don't do this to you again. I'm going to come up with a system that prevents this from happening again. But I feel like in most couples, friendships, relational dynamics, we end up get caught quibbling details. We end up explaining why we left it. We were busy. We were in a rush. We were tired in the morning. We end up dismissing or trying to avoid or shield ourselves from their emotional reaction. Come on, you're overreacting. Isn't this a little bit too much? It's just a shampoo bottle. When we take people that already feel dehumanized, unseen, and unimportant, and we reduce their experience to an it's just, while explaining it away, essentially telling them why they shouldn't be upset and why you have the right to never, ever, ever make sure that bottle is full, we create disconnection. And that disconnection over time, over a multitude of issues, right? Because it's never just a shampoo bottle. We are bumping into each other all the time. We are frustrating each other. We are having moments of friction. These moments, again, could bring us to connection. But when we have these sorts of negative sentiment experiences stack up, we create resentment, we create alienation, and oftentimes we create violence and abuse. And again, I'm not saying anybody deserves to have a shampoo bottle flung at them even on the 5th time of leaving it empty. But I think we need to have a sense of reflection and intentionality in how we deal with the experiences of other people. And remember the fact that we are missing out on some of the key pieces of information, the key moments of a scenario that would influence how someone reacts. We're not there in the shower. We're not there sitting at the table alone when it's the 3rd last-minute cancellation. We're not in the emotional experience of feeling left behind and taken for granted and overwhelmed. We do, however, have the opportunity to try to meet people there, to not abandon them in their frustration, especially if we caused it. We have the right to repair, to develop a sense of grace, and to develop distress tolerance and handle the consequences of our actions when we don't treat people well or we treat them with carelessness.